Stepmom falsely accused me of assault to block my inheritance at 21. Dad believed her and cut me off. 7 years later, he learned the truth. When I was 21, my stepmother falsely accused me of assault to prevent me from inheriting my father's wealth. My dad believed her and cut me off. 7 years later, he discovered the truth. Hello, everyone. My biological parents divorced when I was 9, and they shared equal custody of me. I spent weekdays with my mom, who lived near my school, and weekends with my dad. Despite their separation, both parents were always kind and gentle towards me. While I was sad they were not together, I understood they both loved me deeply. A few years later, my dad met Gina, who would become my stepmother. When I was 11, my dad introduced her to me. She seemed nice, and my dad was clearly happy. He hoped we would get along well. Gina had twin daughters, Emma and Emily, who were 14 at the time. Raised without their father, the twins were quite immature and would throw public fits if they didn't get their way. As an introvert, I quietly observed their behavior. After a year of dating, my dad and Gina decided to marry when I was 12. Even my mom attended the wedding. I was excited to have a new family member. Initially, I thought my stepmother and I got along well. However, a few months after their honeymoon, she told me one morning that she didn't really like me. She said we needed to pretend to get along for my dad's sake when he was around. She also told me to stay out of her way when he wasn't there because she couldn't stand the sight of me. As I reminded her of my mom, hearing her harsh words broke my heart. I had genuinely liked her and hoped for a good relationship. The twins overheard her and later teased me, saying my dad didn't love me and preferred them. I remember crying and telling my mom about it. She immediately called my dad and gave him an earful. My dad assured her that my stepmom would never say such things and that I must have misunderstood her. The following weekend, when I visited my father, my stepmother appeared upset. She stayed silent in front of my dad, but as soon as he left, she angrily whispered to me, threatening that she would ensure I no longer had a dad in my life if I ever told my mom anything about her. She also warned that she would divorce my dad and take all his money, leaving him destitute if I didn't keep quiet. At just 12 years old, I was terrified for my dad, so I nodded in agreement. From that day on, Gina made it her mission to make my life miserable in every way possible. Being a child, I felt I had to endure it silently. Whenever we were alone, she would say hurtful things to me, and I would stay silent, hoping she would eventually stop bullying me. She would insult my height and weight, calling me ugly. I hoped my dad would notice, but he never did. He believed Gina and I had a good relationship and would often force me to go shopping and eat out with her and the kids. She would use my dad's credit card to pay for our meals, but wouldn't let me eat anything substantial at the restaurant. I was only allowed to have soup or dessert, no main course. I would sit there miserably, watching them finish their meals while crying quietly. I would return home hungry, and she would force me to go to bed without eating. Many nights, I cried myself to sleep, both hungry and exhausted from her cruelty. At that point, I was at my wit's end, scared, angry, and frustrated with both my stepmom and my dad. This is why I dreaded visiting my dad on weekends. Every Friday evening, I would try to avoid visiting by coming up with excuses like a stomachache so I could stay with my mom. My parents started noticing, and my dad would call, expressing sadness at not seeing me. My mom would urge me to tell her if something was wrong, but I always kept quiet, still scared of Gina's threats. When I was 14, my dad decided to take the whole family, including me, on a trip to Greece. Initially, I didn't want to go, but my mother told me it was a good opportunity to travel and see the world, so I reluctantly agreed to join them. As usual, Gina pretended to be sweet and kind in front of my dad, asking about school as if she genuinely cared. I noticed she would subtly tease me in her sweet voice, making hurtful comments that wouldn't outright portray her as mean. For example, whenever I mentioned playing basketball, she would joke that I needed to be taller for that sport, even though I was quite tall for my age. She would then say I should focus more on studies if I ever wanted to be successful. The twins would smirk and call me names like meathead, even though I had better grades than them. My dad would notice, but choose to ignore it. Whenever I expressed that her comments hurt me, my dad insisted she was just teasing and that I should lighten up. Gina would nod and tell my dad that I had no sense of humor and needed to learn to have fun. This continued throughout the vacation. One day, in a moment of anger, when she and the twins were teasing me about my weight while I was trying to enjoy the pool, I decided to retaliate. I told the twins that their double chins were embarrassing. Watching their faces fall, I then turned to Gina and told her she shouldn't wear a shrug over her bikini because her huge stomach was still visible, making her look like a penguin. Gina's face turned red with embarrassment, and she ran back to the hotel room. The twins started yelling at me, calling me sexist, and saying how horrible it was for me to say such things about them. Later, my dad confronted me, clearly angry. He asked if I had really spoken to my stepmother and stepsisters like that, and when I admitted it, he lectured me about how he had raised me better and that I should never talk to a woman about her weight. I argued back that they were criticizing my weight, looks, and height, but my dad forced me to apologize to Gina, who had locked herself in the bathroom crying after what I said. Gina and the twins made a big show of accepting my apologies. When I got home, I told my mom everything. She spoke to my dad, who tried to blame me for the whole situation. My mother threatened to call CPS on him if Gina ever commented on my weight or looks again. This scared my dad, and at that, Gina never said anything to me. However, she and the twins would blatantly ignore me whenever my dad wasn't around, which I honestly didn't mind. When I was 16, my mom went away for a few days, so I stayed with my dad and Gina. Gina complained about having to cook for one more person, so on my last night, I decided to make dinner since my mom had taught me to cook from a young age to be independent. Gina wanted to invite some friends over when she heard I was cooking. I prepared the meal, set the table, and served dinner. Everyone loved the food and praised me. My dad decided to do the dishes, so I went to my room. From there, I heard Gina and her friends talking loudly outside my window. Her friends were saying how lucky she was to have a nice husband and a great house. When they mentioned how nice it was that I cooked for them, Gina went on a rant about how annoying I was and that she couldn't stand seeing my face. She told her friends she couldn't wait until I was 18 so she wouldn't have to see me every weekend. When one of her friends mentioned again how nice I seemed, Gina admitted she had hoped I would fail at cooking so she could blame me for something. This shocked me because I was trying to be polite to her, even though I knew she hated me. As time went on, Gina's dislike for me only grew. During college, when I visited my dad for a few days at his insistence, Gina would completely ignore me. She would schedule family activities with just dad and the twins or her and the twins, leaving me at home. If I woke up late during my vacation, she would yell at me, calling me lazy and inconsiderate, even though I always cleaned up after myself. I knew I was always respectful to her because my dad would be furious if I wasn't. Despite being polite and careful not to upset her, it felt like nothing I did was ever enough. She was also inconsiderate of my privacy. She would loudly enter my room while I was sleeping, waking me up or barging in without knocking, making me extremely uncomfortable. She would randomly search my room and look under my bed for reasons unknown to me. She refused to pick up dinner for me, but did so for the family, never inviting me to join them. Despite this, I kept quiet, tried to stay out of the way, and spent time with Dad whenever possible. Now, onto the main incident. When I turned 21, my dad invited me to visit him, saying he had some important news to share. It had been a while since I last visited, so I felt a bit apprehensive. But my mother encouraged me, saying it was good news. I agreed and booked my tickets. Upon arrival, my dad greeted me warmly at the airport and we drove back to his place. I asked him about the news, but he said he would reveal everything during the family dinner. When we arrived, I noticed the twins were home too. It had been a while since I had seen Emma and Emily. They didn't acknowledge my presence, and I didn't acknowledge theirs either. That night, during dinner, my dad started by expressing how proud he was to have 3 wonderful children. He spoke about his gratitude for having such a loving family and wanted to share some exciting news. The atmosphere was positive, and I felt a sense of anticipation as he continued speaking. He looked at each of us with a smile, including Gina, who had been giving me icy glares all day. My dad went on to say that he had recently lost a friend to a heart attack, which made him realize how lucky he was to have us. He had spoken to a lawyer and made a will. Upon hearing the word will, Gina and the twins perked up with excitement. Dad said he had decided to leave the house to my stepmom as she was his wife. Gina beamed with pride and kissed him on the cheek. My dad's house was a 5-bedroom place, and if Gina ever decided to sell it, she could make a fortune. Dad then announced he was leaving his entire retirement account and his car to me. This wasn't just any car. It was a vintage car he had spent a lot of time and money maintaining. The car held sentimental value for both of us, as he often shared stories of his youth and adventures associated with it. As I processed this information, I realized that leaving the car to me was his way of expressing his love. As my dad spoke about his pride in me inheriting the car, Gina's expression shifted from pride to discontent. She exchanged glances with the twins, who seemed equally displeased. It was clear that the idea of me inheriting a significant sum of money and the beloved vintage car stoked their resentment. Dad, apparently unaware of the tension in the room, continued to explain how he would leave the joint bank account he shared with Gina to the twins. Since Gina was a homemaker, the money was entirely my dad's. He expressed his wish for the account to be equally divided between them, assuring them they would have money and a house to live in so they needn't worry if anything happened to him. I thought this arrangement was fair and had no issues with it. However, the twins immediately voiced their disappointment, saying they had expected more. They argued that my dad should also leave them his retirement account, claiming I didn't need it anyway. When my dad questioned their reasoning, Gina chimed in, stating that as a guy, I should find my own way, whereas they were women and needed more money for financial security. My dad reminded Gina that he had already taken care of their college funds, and now they were also getting a house and a bank account, so they had nothing to worry about. Despite this, Gina kept insisting that I didn't deserve so much money. My dad firmly reiterated that his decision was final. I sat quietly, observing as the argument escalated. Suddenly, Gina burst into tears. We looked at her, startled, and my dad reassured her that there was no need to cry since he had divided everything fairly. Through her sobs, Gina claimed she had kept silent for years to protect the family, but couldn't hold it in any longer. The room fell into awkward silence, and my dad and I exchanged confused looks. Despite the palpable tension, he gently encouraged Gina to share what was weighing on her mind. Amidst her sobs, Gina began to recount how a few years ago, I had supposedly tried to force myself on her, but she had kept it hidden to protect me. I was stunned, completely blindsided by the unexpected accusation. Before I could even grasp what was happening, Gina started elaborating on her fabricated story. She told my dad that after our vacation in Greece, where we had an argument about weight and height, I would constantly stare at her and attempt to enter her bedroom uninvited. I sat frozen in my chair as she continued to concoct tales of how I would try to barge in every time she took a shower or get uncomfortably close to her face when we were alone. She claimed she dreaded having me over every weekend because she feared I would behave the same way with the twins. I tried to defend myself, vehemently denying the baseless accusations and yelling at her for having the audacity to make up such lies. But Gina continued to cry as if she were the victim. She went on about how, as I grew older, I made her increasingly uncomfortable. On one occasion, when we were alone, I allegedly tried to force myself on her. My eyes widened in shock, and the blood drained from my face upon hearing such a serious accusation. My dad looked utterly confused and concerned, his eyes darting between me and Gina, clearly at a loss for words. Gina continued her story, claiming she had suffered in silence for years. Afraid to speak up for the sake of the family, I yelled at Gina, calling her a psycho, insisting there was no way I had ever looked at her inappropriately, let alone touched her. Gina yelled back that she was done keeping her silence and needed to expose a monster like me. The twins began shouting furiously at me, accusing me of putting their mother through this and using words like rapist and molester. My head was spinning, and it all felt like a bad dream. I couldn't believe how a pleasant evening had turned into such wild accusations. I looked at my dad for support, but he remained quiet, clearly trying to process everything Gina had said. He asked her if what she had spoken was true, and Gina nodded, asserting that she would never lie to him about his own son and that, as his wife, he should believe her. While I tried to defend myself, my dad asked Gina why she hadn't spoken up earlier. She explained that she feared no one would believe her since I was a minor trying to do inappropriate things with her. As a stepmother who had married my dad, she felt people would dismiss her words. She claimed she had to bear this silently to protect the family. I was crying at this point, begging my dad not to believe her. I never imagined Gina could fabricate such atrocious lies, especially after what she had put me through over the years. Unfortunately, Gina's manipulation had strained my relationship with my dad, and he seemed torn between trusting me and believing his wife. The twins, influenced by their mother's narrative, supported Gina's false accusations and yelled at me to leave their house. I yelled back that it was my dad's place and they shouldn't believe their mother's lies. My dad, amidst the chaos, looked up at me and told me to leave the house until the matter was resolved. It felt like a punch to the gut, being rejected by my own father, who chose to believe his second wife over me, left me hurt, confused, and betrayed. I packed my belongings and left the home I once thought was mine. I flew straight to my mother, who was shocked to see me at her doorstep. When I told her everything, she was furious and ready to confront my stepmom, but I asked her not to, knowing how unpredictable and dangerous Gina could be. If Gina could concoct such wild lies to get me kicked out of my dad's house because she was upset about the inheritance, she could do much more to ruin my life. I couldn't risk having her in my life any longer, which is why I decided to cut off my dad permanently. Since he chose to believe her, he didn't deserve to have me in his life. Later, my mom told me that my dad called her to express his shame in having a son like me and declared he wanted nothing to do with me. Despite her attempts to defend me, it was in vain. My dad's side of the family, convinced by Gina's story, also attacked my mom, accusing her of raising a pervert. I can't even begin to fathom the pain my mom felt hearing such words about her son. The damage was done, and Gina had won. I wish I could say my life improved after cutting her off, but it didn't. Gina and the twins continued bombarding me with vile text messages, threatening that I should stay away from my dad forever. It got so bad that I had to change my number to escape them. Even after that, things didn't get better. Gina's actions left me terrified of being around any woman, fearing I would be falsely accused again and lose my job and career. I was scared to meet anyone or go on dates. Throughout this ordeal, my mom stood by me and believed me. I went through severe depressive and suicidal episodes, and my mom flew in to live with me for a couple of months to make sure I was all right. Slowly, my mental health improved, and I started to rebuild my life. Eventually, I met a wonderful woman named Mara, who brought joy back into my life. She has completely changed my life, and my mom adores her. Mara and my mom mean everything to me, and thanks to them, I continue to live my life with purpose. Just a week ago, I received a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be Amazon, I answered. To my shock, it was my dad. I was stunned to hear his voice after nearly 7 years. He sounded old. When I asked how he got my new number, he dodged the question and asked if I was doing okay. I remained silent and then told him not to bother me again since I had nothing to say to him. That's when my dad broke down and started crying. He begged for my forgiveness, admitting how wrong he was to abandon his own son. My curiosity was piqued, so I waited for him to explain. My dad then revealed that Gina had been cheating on him with his best friend for years. When he confronted her with proof, she stopped hiding and confessed she was tired of being married to a pathetic man like him. Gina admitted she had only married him for his money and despised being with him. When my dad pressed her further, she confessed to fabricating all the accusations against me because she hated me and wanted all his wealth for herself and her daughters. As you can imagine, my dad divorced her, and she got nothing from the marriage due to her affair. Despite her lawyers fighting for alimony, my dad said he had been waiting to divorce Gina so he could officially reach out to me and apologize for what he put me through. He expressed his desire to make up for lost time and rebuild our father-son relationship. At the mention of father and son, I couldn't help but scoff. I told him that he was no father of mine after how quickly he abandoned me for his wife's nasty accusations. I told him I wanted nothing to do with him and that he should stop bothering me. I ended the call and hoped he got the message. Since then, I've been bombarded with calls from my dad and his side of the family, who I don't even talk to, saying that my dad has suffered enough and that I'm just making it harder on him. Their messages leave me feeling conflicted. Am I the bad guy for refusing to talk to my dad after he cut me off due to Gina's false accusations? Update 1. My post was locked, but hopefully, it's okay now. I've posted the link and tried my best with spacing, I'm on Mobile. To everyone who offered support and advice, thank you so much. Your words helped me see things more clearly. I'm not just furious at my dad for believing my stepmother over me, but also for all those years she harassed me while he did nothing to protect me. I was just a child, and she blackmailed and manipulated me while I kept quiet. I think it's time I open up to my mom and let her know exactly what I went through, because I know she understands. Update 2. Hi everyone. It's been a week since my last update. For those concerned about my mental health, I'm doing okay. Thank you for your kindness. I booked tickets for my mom to come visit me so to tell her and Mara everything. They already sensed something was up. I started by telling them about Dad's contact after all these years, which shocked my mom. She asked why he reached out, and I explained. She had no idea he had gone through a divorce and was furious at Gina for what she put everyone through. Then, I told them about how Gina would manipulate me when I was just 12 years old. I recounted how she bullied me when Dad wasn't around and threatened to divorce him if I ever told him. I didn't realize how traumatic these events were until I began to open up about them, one by one. By the time I finished, I had tears streaming down my face. Mara and my mom were crying quietly as well. Well, my mom immediately hugged me repeatedly, saying that I shouldn't have kept this all in and that it was okay to share. I cried for half an hour while my mom held me. Mara also told me that no child should have gone through what I did and that it was completely fine if I chose never to speak to my dad again, since he should have protected me. My mom nodded, saying I had no obligations to explain anything to my dad because when I needed him the most, he chose to believe his wife over me. The only reason he was reaching out now was that he was lonely and had no family left. That's when I realized they were right. My dad perhaps never really loved me, because if he did, he would have never believed I was capable of such things. Since then, I felt much lighter after sharing my past with Gina out loud, with my mom and Mara. I've blocked my dad and will continue to block any other family member who tries to interject in my life. I owe no explanations to those who chose to abandon me. Update 3. Wow, it's been 6 months since I wrote this post, and I can't believe how much my life has changed since then. I want to start by sharing some happy news. I proposed to Mara, and she said yes. My mom is thrilled for us, and we're considering moving closer to her because the schools are better there. Since both of us can work from anywhere, it makes sense for our future family, thanks to advice from people on Reddit. I've also started therapy. It's helping me feel better, step by step. I'm trying to focus on the positive aspects of my life, like Mara and my mom. They've always been there for me, and I'm deeply grateful for their support. The past has been tough, but I'm looking forward to a brighter future, free from all the lies and drama. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My mother admitted to hating me simply because I was an unplanned child. At my wedding, my parents chose his party over mine. This is about how my family relationship totally collapsed once I married Emily, who is to 5F. I am 26 meters and in my last year of medical school. My mother has consistently given preference to my older brother Marcus, who is 27 years old, over me. She has loved Marcus since we were kids, and she has never concealed it from me. I'm not sure what it is about him that makes him her favorite. My parents chose to give me to my grandparents to raise for 8 years after I was born, only a year after Marcus. Taking care of Marcus and me simultaneously was too much for my mother to handle. My mother struggled to care for us both because she was suffering from postpartum depression. According to my grandparents, my mother intended to give me up to my grandparents, George and Elena Cooper, who saw the seriousness of her illness and didn't fight too hard. Robert, my 5'm tall father, was unable to care for me by himself while working. I grew up in my grandparents' loving and content home, feeling safe and content because I was unaware as a newborn that they were not my own parents. But things started to change when I was able to walk and comprehend speech. Occasionally, my parents would pay me a visit and explain that they were my biological parents and that I was only temporarily staying with my grandparents. For me, these visits were always perplexing and bittersweet. I was thrilled to see my folks. On the one hand, conversely, I experienced a feeling of bewilderment and desolation after playing and chatting with me for 2 to 3 hours. My parents would say farewell and head back home, taking Marcus with them. I realized that Marcus was always their top focus. As this trend persisted, my parents' few visits made me feel unwelcome, even though my grandparents gave me all the love and attention they could. My parents finally took me back home when I turned 8 years old. I was initially thrilled to see my family again and be reunited with them. But as I realized how much better my life had been with my grandparents, the excitement gradually subsided. Living in the same room as Marcus was one of the first adjustments I had to make. My parents had the option of giving me a spare bedroom, but Marcus had always had his own. In order for Marcus and I to become brothers, they insisted that we share a room. Marcus made it quite evident to me that he detested this new arrangement. Marcus would label me a brat and a stranger. If I read comic books my grandparents had bought me or played too loudly, Marcus would scoff and call me childish. If I attempted to adorn my side of the room with posters or sketches of my favorite superheroes, Marcus would roll his eyes and mockingly refer to me as the teacher's pet. If I proudly showed my parents my good grades when I brought them home, Marcus would tell me that I sounded terrible and that I should give up. When I practiced playing the keyboard that my grandparents had given me, Marcus would make fun of me for even the smallest things, such as the way I arranged my toys or the way I described my day. The term dork or nerd would be used to describe me whenever I expressed an interest in reading or learning something new. I eventually came to the realization that the activities I liked turned into points of friction. There was a persistent sense of tension and conflict in place of the warmth and welcome I had experienced at my grandparents' house. Everything I did was problematic for Marcus, which made me feel self-conscious. Imagine being teased for every little thing by your older brother, someone you admire. It causes you to begin questioning yourself. I was too young to realize that he was really bullying me. I wanted to blend in with my family because I felt like I might be the issue. I only read my comic books in the school library after I stopped doing so at home. I completely quit using my keyboard. I did all of this in the hopes that if I changed, my brother would accept me. Unfortunately, Marcus's attitude toward me didn't change despite my best efforts to fit in and adapt. I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. The more I attempted to win his approval, Marcus would still find ways to make fun of me, even after I stopped doing all the things that irritated him. Due to a skin problem that has since been treated, I recall having a lot of pimples as a child. Marcus would continuously comment on how awful my face was and how ugly I looked. I would cry and go to my parents, since hearing this was so painful. My mother, Linda, 50F, would encourage me to stop sobbing and be a man instead of standing by me and reprimanding Marcus. Dad was also of little assistance. He would want to avoid the situation. Instead of coming to Mom, she would advise me that I should confront my brother. I felt lost and alone as a result of Marcus's bullying and my parents' incapacity to provide me with a sense of security and love. I missed the supportive atmosphere I shared with my grandparents, where I always felt appreciated and stood by whenever they could. My grandparents would come see me, and they would attempt to speak to Marcus politely and warn him not to bother me. However, he never gave them any attention. I gradually turned into a very irate teenager. As I grew older, Marcus did not like it at all when I became taller than him. Despite the fact that he was older than me, to annoy me, he would label me a slender man or a giant because of my height. But this time, I began returning the favor by calling him a shrimp, rather than requesting assistance from my parents in order to prevent him from reaching his books without a chair. I would purposefully place them on the highest shelf or above the cabinet. It was satisfying to defend myself, but it also meant that our house was growing more antagonistic. We fought each other more often and fiercely, none of us prepared to give up. The annual awards ceremony at my school was the final straw that made it clear to me how much my parents preferred my brother above me. I was on the verge of winning the top prize in my class, since I had put my all into my academics. I hoped for my parents' pride and encouragement, so I wanted their support and attendance at the event. However, my mother told me a few days prior to the ceremony that Marcus had a swimming competition on the same day. Even though his competition and my ceremony were hours apart, Marcus wanted to concentrate on his preparation because, in my mother's opinion, he needed her more. My dad would be there to support me, she told me. I accepted the fact that at least one parent would support me, despite my disappointment. I was taken aback when my dad unexpectedly failed to show up on the day of the wedding. Marcus was having a panic attack before his competition, and my mom apparently contacted him immediately to tell him that she needed him there to help him relax. Dad decided not to attend my awards ceremony and instead hurried to Marcus's side. I recall that there were no recognized faces in the audience supporting me when I approached to accept my medal. All I could feel was a deep sense of abandonment and loneliness. Marcus and my dad weren't there. When I got home later, when I contacted them, I found out that they were still with Marcus. It took them many hours to return, ecstatic and celebrating Marcus's triumph in his contest. They informed me how wonderfully he had done, and he was holding an award as though it were the most important thing of the year. They gave him a tight hug and congratulated him on his achievements. They didn't even offer me an apology for being absent from my ceremony. It was obviously a sobering reminder of my place in my parents' priorities. In contrast to Marcus, I was often overlooked and undervalued despite my efforts and accomplishments throughout my time in college. This trend persisted. My parents had a great celebration when Marcus was accepted to a nearby public institution, but they hardly noticed my acceptance to medical school. My mother continued to disparage Emily, a talented medical researcher, even after I began dating her. She would say that Emily was too focused on her profession and not enough on her family, and that I should look for someone more conventional, like Marcus's girlfriend. Let's move on to the primary motivation behind this writing. I asked Emily to marry me 6 months ago, and she accepted. I had conflicting responses when I told my parents about the engagement out of courtesy, and because I wanted them to hear the news from me rather than from someone else. My mom said nothing, but my dad thanked me and appeared really delighted for me. She then texted me to let me know how disappointed she was that I hadn't given her voice regarding Emily. I invited Marcus and everyone else to the wedding 2 months ago. Even though he didn't congratulate me that we got engaged, I still didn't feel bad about this and invited him to the wedding. I was a little let down when Marcus unexpectedly denied the invitation without providing an explanation. What really surprised me, though, was when my dad called to let me know that my mom had chosen not to attend my wedding, even though he would be there. I was surprised and inquired as to why my mom was going to my wedding, but my dad clarified that Marcus had allegedly scheduled an anniversary party for his girlfriend on the same day. I followed Marcus on social media and knew they had recently celebrated their anniversary, so this news was strange. I chose to speak with Marcus directly to get clarification, rather than initially going up against my mother. Even though we didn't talk much, I wanted to treat the matter with dignity and respect. I gave Marcus a call and asked him directly if he was truly not intending to attend my wedding because of the anniversary party. Marcus surprised me by confirming that this was true. He clarified that at first he and his girlfriend had intended to have a party to honor their anniversary, but they lacked the necessary funds. Marcus acknowledged that he had worked hard to find a unique location for their celebration that was within their means in order to make up for it to his fiancée. Unfortunately, he stated that my wedding day coincided with the venue's only available date. I apologized and politely pointed out that he could have picked a different day, highlighting how much I would have valued his attendance at my wedding. Marcus, however, responded that his girlfriend's pleasure was more important than anything else and made it plain that he wouldn't move their anniversary celebration date to fit my wedding schedule. His remarks were hurtful, and he hung up the phone before I could respond. My mother provided the same old justification she frequently gave me when I phoned her to discuss the matter. She stressed that my dad was already going to attend my wedding, so I shouldn't be selfish and ask her to go too, and that Marcus would be upset if she didn't go to his anniversary celebration. My voice nearly broke as I told her how hurtful it was for me to always feel like she treated me less than my brother. I told her that, although she was free to do as she pleased, I would no longer recognize her as a parent. My mother then laughed at what I had said and advised me not to get so worked up over my wedding. I decided to stop talking to my mother completely after the argument we had over her decision to not come to my wedding. My attention turned to making sure Emily had the most exquisite wedding and that our celebration was full of love and happiness. Even though I was disappointed with my parents, I was thankful that my dad kept his word and supported me on my special day. My grandparents, who had previously expected my mom's absence despite their encouragement, were naturally saddened and disappointed when Emily and I ultimately were married. They had even forewarned my mother in advance, stressing how crucial her attendance was. They were deeply affected by the fact that she still decided not to go. The situation worsened when Marcus posted photos from his anniversary celebration in which my mother was seen drinking and dancing uncontrollably. The way they both appeared to show off their indifference to my feelings regarding their absence from my wedding was the problem, not what she was doing. That's the current situation. Throughout the day, my mother never once phoned Emily or me to say hello or to offer congratulations, though I'm not sure how to move on. I do know that I can't allow them to continue to harm me in this way. Emily is understandably upset with their treatment of us, particularly with reference to our wedding, but she supports any choice I make. Is my desire to sever all contact with my mother and brother an overreaction? Is it time to accept that they will never change and move on with my life without them? Or should I give them another chance to make things right? First update. My wedding was a month ago, and since then, things have taken an unexpected turn. I got a ton of encouraging notes after I last posted about my mom picking my brother's anniversary party over my wedding. I appreciate all of your nice remarks and guidance. What has transpired since then is as follows. Although my grandparents, George and Eleanor, have always been my staunchest allies, I never thought they would act in such an extreme manner. They told my mother last week that they might take her out of their inheritance and leave me as the only heir. They said that their choice was the result of years of witnessing her ignore me and favor Marcus, not just the fact that she missed my wedding. According to my grandmother, she and my mother had a furious discussion during which she detailed all of the instances of favoritism she had seen over the years. She cited specific instances, such as my mother's unrelenting criticism of Emily, the disregard for my academic accomplishments, and her decision to go to Marcus's hurriedly organized anniversary party rather than my wedding. The way my mother reacted to this news was what truly surprised me. She called me nonstop within hours of finding out she might not be able to inherit. She was crying about the inheritance, not our tense relationship or the harm she had caused. When I eventually answered one of her calls, in fact, she asked, "How could you have allowed your grandparents to harm me like this? I am their daughter." Then she made a startling suggestion. In order for her to attend, she recommended that Emily and I conduct another wedding ceremony, this time with only close family members. She said she wanted to put things right after giving her actions a lot of thought. But when she promptly followed up with, "Once we do this, you can tell your grandparents everything is fine between us," her comments seemed false. Her attempt to explain her prior absence by stating, "You have to understand, Marcus needed me that day." They had already paid for the location, and his partner was going through a difficult moment. What should I have done was the most bizarre aspect. She was still unable to recognize how her decisions had harmed me. Marcus also became involved and texted me in a furious manner. He said that I was manipulating our grandparents and making them hostile to the family. He wrote, "You've always been their favorite, and now you're using that to steal mom's inheritance." He didn't appear to see the irony of his criticism of favoritism. Emily was also contacted on social media by his girlfriend, who said that they were being unkind to Marcus by interfering with their anniversary celebration. With all of this family drama, Emily replied, "Interesting how you're concerned about your anniversary celebration being ruined when you deliberately scheduled it on our wedding day, before blocking her right away. My father is now stuck in the middle, even though he was at least there during our wedding. He tried to be a mediator. When he called me yesterday, he remarked, 'Your mother truly regrets missing the wedding. Is it not possible for you to perform this minor ceremony for her? It would mean so much.' He was silent for a while before acknowledging, 'She's not handling this well, but she does love you.' After I brought up the fact that Mom appeared more focused on the inheritance than our relationship, Emily and I spoke about holding another ceremony, but we both felt that it would not feel genuine. 'A wedding isn't just a photo op opportunity,' Emily said. 'It's about sharing love with those who truly care about us.' Your mother had the opportunity to attend, but declined. The fact that my mother has begun to alter history is especially upsetting. She is explaining to her family that she was forced to miss the wedding since Marcus needed her assistance during a trying moment. Conveniently, she is omitting the fact that it was an anniversary celebration that was purposefully planned on the day of our wedding. Mom's sister, my aunt, called me lately to tell me about something fascinating. It seems that before the wedding, my mother had informed her that she was teaching me a lesson by not going. She assumed that I would abruptly give in and move our appointment to accommodate Marcus's party. She was truly surprised that I had planned the wedding without her, when that didn't occur. Last week's phone conversation with Marcus was the most illuminating. Perhaps driven by resentment over the inheritance issue, he revealed in a rare moment of candor that there were other dates open for the anniversary celebration. His fiancée thought it would be lovely to celebrate on the same day as a family wedding, so they decided on our wedding date out of a number of alternatives. "You've always had everything handed to you by our grandparents," he said chillingly. When I questioned why he would intentionally harm me in that way, he responded, "It's time you experienced what it's like to be disappointed." Through it all, Emily has been my pillar of support. She made a point that I hadn't thought of. My mother's sudden desire for a fresh ceremony, unmotivated by a want to commemorate our marriage, but rather by her wish to be a caring mother for our grandparents. Emily claimed that if she truly wanted to make amends, she would be expressing regret for years of favoritism rather than only attempting to set up a picture op. I am steadfast in my resolve to forego another ceremony. This is about upholding boundaries and self-respect, not about retaliation or retribution. My mother had the chance to be present on one of the most significant days of my life, but she declined. That fact cannot be altered by any number of contrived pictures or theatrical rituals. I'm currently not in communication with Marcus and only have sporadic contact with my parents. My grandparents have been quite supportive of this choice, telling me that sometimes the best course of action is to avoid harmful people. I'm resolutely pursuing my medical education, while Emily and I concentrate on creating our future together. Sincerely, I feel lighter after standing my ground, even though I realize this update may come across as resentful. Yes, it is difficult to know that my brother purposefully attempted to overshadow my wedding day, and it is painful that my mother is more concerned with her inheritance than with our relationship. However, I'm not questioning myself or attempting to win their approval. For the first time in my life, perhaps learning to accept the family we have while forming the family we require is what it truly means to grow up. Update 2? 2 weeks have passed since my last update, and the matter is now resolved. My grandfather, George, called me yesterday to let me know that he and Grandma Eleanor had formally created new wills that excluded my mother entirely and named me as their only heir. Even though I had expected this to happen following my previous post, it still surprised me to hear it formally. My grandfather clarified that my mother's treatment of me wasn't the only factor in their choice. They think that I would be able to care for them in their later years more effectively than my mother could, he said. "We trust you won't abandon us to a care facility unless absolutely necessary." As you might imagine, my mother, Linda, has not been pleased with this news. She has been phoning me nonstop and messaging me, saying I have no right to inherit anything from her parents and that I have deceived her, despite the fact that I haven't gotten anything yet. It seems as though she believes I'm stealing from her. She reacted with charges that I had swayed her in their favor. When I adamantly advised her to speak with my grandparents directly about her concerns, I reminded her that any modifications to their will were a direct result of the things she had done over the years that had caused friction between us and affected their choice. As our disagreement heated up, she revealed something extremely upsetting. In a moment of unadulterated honesty, or resentment, she expressed her wish that I had never been created. She accused me of creating her postpartum depression and disclosed that I was an unplanned pregnancy. The most startling aspect was when she acknowledged that she had originally thought about placing me for adoption in order to get rid of me, but she changed her mind to her parents' conservative beliefs and chose to have them take care of me instead. "With Marcus things were always easier," she remarked. "He never required the same level of care that you did. I never felt inadequate as a mother because of him." At last, her comments clarified everything. She was partial to Marcus because she felt guilty and resentful of me, not because she wanted to love him more. For the first time since the wedding, I contacted my father, Robert. Following that chat, he told me that he never regretted having me, even though he admitted that some of Mom's statements regarding my unplanned pregnancy and her battles with postpartum depression were accurate. He genuinely apologized for the first time after I told him how their years of favoritism toward Marcus had terribly wounded me. My dad has acknowledged my decision to give me some space, even though I'm not sure how we will continue to be friends. He now appears to realize how his passive part in my upbringing fueled the dysfunction in the family. Given how much I admired Marcus when we were younger, I sent him one last text telling him how he could have been a better and more encouraging brother. When I moved home with our parents, I talked openly about how lonely I felt growing up with our grandparents and how much I desired his approval. I made it plain that I had no grudges toward him for being Mom's favorite. He didn't, but I informed him that he had the option to be a supportive part of my life rather than compete with me as an older brother. I also expressed my disappointment in him and said I was ending our connection. His number is blocked, and I don't currently have any plans to unlock it anytime soon. Throughout it all, Emily has been my staunchest ally. Every day, she reminds me that family is about individuals who choose to love and support you without conditions, not just genetic ties. Together, we're concentrating on creating our future, and I know that I can handle any obstacles that may arise because she is at my side. Although hearing my mother's admission of my birth and her animosity toward me was upsetting, it was also somewhat freeing. At last, it clarified the pattern of conduct I had encountered throughout my life. Even though it doesn't always make the hurt go away, realizing why someone injured you might help you realize that their behavior was never motivated by your value as a person. I appreciate all of your help along the way. Reddit. When I was doubting myself, your messages and remarks kept me going. It really helped to know that I wasn't the only one who had to deal with familial favoritism. I would especially like to thank individuals who had similar experiences. Through this process, I may have lost some family members, but I have also acquired self-respect, clarity, and the bravery to put my own health first. That can occasionally be the best bequest we can have. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.